Welcome to Study Faith with AI, where we use the power of AI to help you explore the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I'm Meg Jensen,
And I'm Paul Carter.
and we're Google AIs. Whether you're a lifelong member or just starting to learn about the church, we're here to dive deep into its history, beliefs, and culture.
So if you're ready to learn, you're in the right place.
That's right.
Let's get started. Welcome to our deep dive into the authorship of the Book of Mormon.
It's a big one.
It is a big one. It's a question that has intrigued and divided people for centuries. And in this deep dive,
Absolutely.
we'll explore a range of viewpoints, evidence,
Yeah.
aiming for a balanced
Sure.
and insightful understanding.
Yeah.
We have some fascinating historical details to uncover, intriguing parallels to analyze,
Yeah.
and we'll even delve into the cultural and intellectual influences
Absolutely.
that might have shaped Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon's creation.
What's really captivating about this topic is how it intersects with history, culture, and personal belief. It's like piecing together a complex puzzle where every piece, historical accounts, linguistic analysis, theological interpretations, contribute to the bigger picture.
Exactly. We'll be looking at everything from accounts of the translation process to comparisons with other writings from that time period. We even have some surprising connections to explore, like the story of Solomon Spaulding and his lost manuscript.
Okay.
And a book called View of the Hebrews.
Sure.
And we'll be unpacking this idea of pseudo-biblicism that was quite popular in Joseph Smith's time.
I think it's essential to start with Joseph Smith's world.
Okay.
Understanding the environment in which he lived can offer valuable insights into the genesis of the Book of Mormon.
Okay. Let's journey back to the early 1800s. What was life like for Joseph Smith in that era?
Imagine rural New England in the early 19th century, a time and place where treasure hunting wasn't just a childhood pastime. Belief in the supernatural was deeply ingrained in everyday life. This was the world Joseph Smith was born into. His family was actively involved in education, even running their own schools.
Interesting.
And interestingly, Joseph himself briefly worked as a Methodist exhorter.
A Methodist exhorter. What exactly did that entail?
Exhorters were essentially lay preachers who delivered religious speeches, often with a passionate and fiery style.
Interesting.
This experience likely exposed Joseph to different forms of religious rhetoric and preaching styles, which might have influenced his own communication later on.
So we're seeing a young Joseph Smith immersed in a world of religion and folklore, surrounded by a culture that embraced the supernatural. How does this connect to the Book of Mormon?
This is where the concept of pseudo-biblicism comes into play. It was a literary style that was surprisingly popular in 19th century America. Writers, even those writing about secular topics, would mimic the language and structure of the Bible.
Hold on. They were writing about things like politics and history using biblical language.
Yes. Take, for example, the first book of Napoleon written in 1809. It recounts the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, but it does so using phrases like, and it came to pass, and behold, distinctly biblical expressions. This style was very much in vogue.
So this type of writing was already circulating in the cultural atmosphere. Could it have influenced Joseph Smith, perhaps unconsciously, as he worked on the Book of Mormon?
That's a question worth pondering. It at least suggests that the Book of Mormon's style wasn't entirely unique for its time. It emerged from a cultural context where biblical language was widely admired and emulated.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned earlier that we'd be discussing Solomon Spaulding and View of the Hebrews. What's the connection there?
These are two elements that often pop up in discussions about the Book of Mormon's origins. Solomon Spaulding was a writer who, in the early 1800s, penned a fictional manuscript about a Roman colony in America. After his death, some claim that his manuscript was the true source of the Book of Mormon, alleging that Joseph Smith somehow acquired it and plagiarized it.
So it's a theory that seeks to explain the Book of Mormon as a product of plagiarism rather than divine revelation.
Exactly. However, this theory has been largely debunked.
Okay.
Spalding's manuscript was eventually found,
Yeah.
and it bears little resemblance to the Book of Mormon in terms of plot, themes, or style.
So case closed on the Solomon Spalding theory.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Now, View of the Hebrews is a different story.
Okay.
Published in 1823, it presents a theory about the Native Americans being descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, a theme that resonates with the Book of Mormon.
So are we saying that Joseph Smith might have borrowed ideas from View of the Hebrews?
It's a possibility that some scholars have explored.
Okay.
The connection becomes even more intriguing when we consider that Oliver Cowdery, one of Joseph Smith's scribes during the Book of Mormon's translation, was acquainted with the author of View of the Hebrews.
Wow. That's quite a coincidence. It definitely adds another layer to the discussion. But before we dive deeper into potential influences, I'm curious about someone you mentioned earlier, Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream.
Ah, yes. This dream, as recounted by Joseph Smith's mother, Lucy Mack Smith, has fascinated people for years.
Okay.
It occurred when Joseph Smith was just a child.
Yeah.
In the dream, his father, Joseph Smith Sr., encounters a beautiful tree bearing delicious fruit, symbolizing the pure love of God.
Okay, so far so good. What happens next?
He's commanded to bring all his children to partake of the fruit.
Yeah.
But they face opposition and scorn from people gathered in a spacious building representing the worldliness and corruption of Babylon.
Wow, that's a powerful and symbolic dream.
It is.
Does it connect to the Book of Mormon in any way?
Some scholars have drawn parallels between this dream and elements of the Book of Mormon narrative.
Yeah.
Particularly Lehi's vision of the tree of life.
Right.
And the subsequent rejection of its fruit.
Right.
By those who choose wickedness.
So could this dream have been a sort of premonition or a seed of inspiration?
It's possible.
That later it influenced the Book of Mormon.
It's a possibility. It at least highlights that Joseph Smith grew up in a family deeply immersed in religious thought.
Right.
And open to visionary experiences, which certainly adds a fascinating dimension to our understanding of his background.
Absolutely. It paints a richer picture of the environment that shaped his early life.
Yeah.
But what about other potential influences on the Book of Mormon?
Sure.
I've heard that there are some interesting parallels with the writings of prominent figures from that era.
That's right. We'll be exploring those parallels in depth. We'll analyze the similarities in language, themes, and even specific phrases, examining whether they point to shared cultural influences or something more.
This is where it gets really fascinating for me. I'm eager to unpack those parallels
Me too.
And see what they reveal about the Book of Mormon's creation.
And I think our listener will find this next part of our deep dive particularly engaging.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
All right. Okay. We've explored Joseph Smith's early life and influences like pseudo-biblicism.
Right.
Now let's get into some of the specific parallels scholars have found between the Book of Mormon and other writings.
Right.
This is where it feels like we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of authorship.
It's fascinating to delve into these comparisons, isn't it? They raise thought-provoking questions about potential sources of inspiration and the complex interplay between culture and creativity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned last time that there are intriguing parallels with the works of Mercy Otis Warren and David Ramsey.
That's right.
Can you give us some examples?
Certainly. Both Warren and the Book of Mormon used the phrase, surrendered themselves prisoners of war.
Wow.
In remarkably similar contexts. Describing battle outcomes. But it goes beyond just this one phrase. You see echoes in vocabulary, sentence structure, and even the pacing of historical narratives.
So it's not just a word here or there, but a broader stylistic resonance.
Exactly.
Why is the parallel with Mercy Otis Warren particularly significant?
Warren was a prominent historian and playwright during the American Revolution. Her works were widely read and respected. And it's plausible that Joseph Smith might have been exposed to them.
So her writings could represent a potential source of inspiration.
Yes.
A piece of the cultural puzzle.
That's right.
That Joseph Smith might have drawn upon.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that these types of parallels aren't limited to historical narratives. Scholars have also noted similarities between the Book of Mormon and the sermons of prominent preachers like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield.
Oh, right. We talked about how Joseph Smith was a Methodist exhorter in his youth.
Right.
It makes sense that he would have been familiar with the preaching styles of these powerful figures.
Exactly. Critics of the Book of Mormon argue that these parallels point to plagiarism, suggesting that Joseph Smith simply borrowed from existing sources.
Yeah.
However, there's another way to interpret these similarities.
I'm all ears. What's another perspective on these shared elements?
Think of it this way. Joseph Smith, like any writer, was a product of his time.
Right.
He was immersed in a specific cultural and intellectual milieu, exposed to certain ideas, language, and literary conventions.
Oh, right.
It's natural that these influences would find their way into his work even unconsciously.
So rather than deliberate copying, it's more about absorbing and reflecting.
Yeah.
The prevailing intellectual trends of his era.
Yeah.
It's like saying you can't help but be influenced by the music you listen to or the books you read.
That's a great analogy, and it brings us to a crucial question.
Okay.
Can a text be both a product of its time and divinely inspired?
That's a question that gets to the heart of this entire deep dive, doesn't it? It's like asking, can the human and the divine coexist?
Right.
Even collaborate?
Precisely. And for many people of faith, the answer is a resounding yes.
Okay.
They believe that God can work through human instruments, even imperfect ones, to bring forth his message.
So for someone who believes in divine revelation, these parallels wouldn't necessarily invalidate the Book of Mormon's authenticity.
Exactly.
They might even see them as evidence of God working within a specific cultural context, using existing language and ideas as building blocks for a new revelation.
That's a powerful perspective. It suggests that inspiration can take many forms, weaving together the threads of human experience and divine purpose.
It's making me think of the zeitgeist concept you mentioned earlier. Could you explain that a bit more for our listener?
Of course, zeitgeist refers to the intellectual and cultural climate of a particular era, the prevailing ideas, beliefs, and artistic expressions that shape a society's outlook.
Okay.
It's like the intellectual air we breathe.
Yeah.
And it inevitably influences our thoughts and creations.
So could we say that the Book of Mormon emerged from the zeitgeist of early 19th century America?
Yeah.
Reflecting the religious fervor, the fascination with the ancient past, and the prevalence of biblical language?
Absolutely. And this understanding doesn't diminish the Book of Mormon's spiritual significance for those who believe in its divine origin.
Okay.
It simply situates it within a broader historical and cultural context.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's shift gears a bit
Sure.
and talk about the actual translation process.
Okay.
This is a topic that's often shrouded in mystery and intrigue.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what we know about how the Book of Mormon was translated?
This is where we get to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Exploring the methods and experiences that led to the Book of Mormon's creation.
Right.
The traditional narrative, often emphasized in church settings, portrays Joseph Smith translating directly from the golden plates.
Okay.
But historical accounts and witness testimonies reveal a more nuanced picture.
Nuance is good. It usually means there's a richer, more complex story to uncover.
Yeah.
What details do we have about this more nuanced process?
A key element in the translation process was the use of a seer stone.
Okay.
Joseph Smith would place this stone in a hat, locking out external light, and then dictate the words of the Book of Mormon to his scribes.
Wait, so he wasn't actually looking at the plates while translating?
Not directly, no.
Oh.
This has led to much debate and speculation. Some suggest that the seer stone acted as a conduit for revelation, allowing Joseph Smith to access the text through spiritual means rather than direct visual translation.
So it's more about receiving inspiration.
That's right.
And dictating the words as they came to him.
Exactly.
Guided by the seer stone. It's fascinating to think of the translation process unfolding in this way.
It is.
It adds another layer of mystery to the whole story.
It does. And this is where the experience of the 8 witnesses becomes particularly intriguing.
Oh, right. The 8 witnesses are those who claim to have seen and handled the golden plates.
Right.
But I've always been a bit confused about the nature of their testimony.
Sure.
What exactly did they see and experience?
That's a great question, and it's one that has generated much discussion and interpretation over the years.
Yeah.
The 8 witnesses left behind written testimonies affirming that they had seen and handled the plates.
Okay.
However, the nature of their experience remains open to interpretation.
meaning that their accounts are somewhat ambiguous.
Yes. Some Latter-day Saint scholars suggest that the 8 witnesses may have had a spiritual rather than a purely physical experience.
Right.
They might have seen the plates through a manifestation of divine power.
Yeah.
A vision granted to them as confirmation of the Book of Mormon's authenticity.
That's a fascinating possibility.
Yeah.
It suggests that their testimony was rooted in a profound spiritual encounter, not just a casual observation.
Right.
But what about those who argue that Joseph Smith simply fabricated the whole story?
Yeah.
How do they explain the testimony of the 8 witnesses?
That's a challenge for those who advocate for alternative authorship theories.
Yeah.
The 8 witnesses came from diverse backgrounds and had no apparent motive to lie.
Yeah.
Their testimonies remain a powerful piece of the puzzle, one that continues to be debated and analyzed.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the question of authorship.
Right.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the cultural influences on Joseph Smith to the intriguing parallels with other writings and the mysterious translation process.
Right.
What's the one key takeaway you'd like our listener to ponder as we head into the final part of our exploration?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the question of the Book of Mormon's authorship is multifaceted and open to interpretation.
Right.
There's no easy answer, no single piece of evidence that definitively settles the debate.
So it's a journey of exploration where we weigh the evidence, consider different perspectives, and ultimately arrive at our own conclusions.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this topic so captivating.
Yeah.
It challenges us to think critically, to grapple with ambiguity, and to engage with profound questions about history, faith, and the nature of truth itself.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious about the Book of Mormon's place in the modern world.
Yeah.
Is it still considered a relevant and influential text, or has it become more of a historical artifact?
For millions of Latter-day Saints worldwide, the Book of Mormon is far from a relic of the past.
Yeah.
It's a living, breathing text, but guides their daily lives, shapes their understanding of God, and informs their worldview.
So it's not just something they read on Sundays.
Yeah.
It's woven into the fabric of their lives.
Precisely. They study it individually and with their families. They quote its verses in their sermons and speeches. And they turn to its teachings for comfort, guidance, and inspiration in their daily lives.
Wow. So it's deeply embedded in their religious practice.
It is.
And personal lives.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
Are there any specific examples of how the Book of Mormon has shaped Latter-day Saint culture or beliefs?
There are many.
Okay.
One prominent example is the emphasis on family history and genealogy.
Right.
The Book of Mormon stresses the importance of knowing one's ancestors and connecting with past generations.
Right. I've heard about the church's extensive genealogical resources and the importance they place on tracing family lineages.
It's a core part of their faith.
Wow.
This emphasis stems from the Book of Mormon's teachings about the eternal nature of families and the responsibility to perform ordinances for deceased ancestors.
Right.
It has led to a vibrant genealogical research culture within the church, with millions of members dedicating countless hours to tracing their family trees and performing temple rituals for their ancestors.
It's like a collective ancestral memory project, weaving the past and present together through research and religious rituals.
It is.
Fascinating. Are there other ways the Book of Mormon has shaped the church's culture?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The Book of Mormon also promotes values like hard work, self-reliance, and community service. These values are deeply ingrained in Latter-day Saint culture and influence everything from their economic practices to their approach to humanitarian aid and disaster relief.
So these values act as a sort of ethical framework, shaping their worldview and interactions with the world. I'm beginning to understand how profoundly the Book of Mormon influences their lives. But I know there have also been controversies surrounding its claims, particularly about Native American history and origins. Can you shed some light on those?
This is a sensitive topic that requires careful consideration.
The Book of Mormon claims that ancient Israelites migrated to the Americas and established civilizations that ultimately gave rise to the Native American populations.
So it's presenting an alternative narrative to the widely accepted anthropological and historical accounts of Native American origins.
Yes. This has led to both intrigue and controversy.
Right.
For some, the Book of Mormon's account resonates deeply
Right.
and provides a spiritual connection to an ancient Israelite heritage.
Yeah.
However, for others,
Right.
particularly many indigenous scholars and activists, these claims are seen as problematic and even harmful.
Can you elaborate on why some Native Americans find these claims harmful?
One concern is that the Book of Mormon's narrative, even when presented with good intentions, can overshadow and erase the rich diversity and complexity of indigenous histories and cultures.
Right.
It can create a monolithic view of Native Americans as simply descendants of Israelites, ignoring their unique tribal identities.
Right. Languages and cultural traditions.
So it's about respecting the diversity and agency of indigenous peoples, ensuring that their voices and stories are not silenced or overridden by external narratives.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. Are there other concerns?
Yes. The Book of Mormon also depicts the downfall of these ancient American civilizations as a consequence of their wickedness and rejection of God.
Okay.
This narrative, some argue, has been used to justify the colonization and dispossession of Native American lands and the imposition of European culture and religion.
So it's not just about historical accuracy, but also about the ethical implications of how these narratives have been used to justify oppression and injustice.
Precisely.
Right.
It underscores the importance of engaging with these issues with sensitivity and humility, recognizing the historical trauma and ongoing struggles faced by indigenous communities.
It's a reminder that we need to be mindful of the power of narratives, how they can shape our understanding of history, identity, and our relationships with others.
Absolutely. And I think this leads us to a broader reflection on the Book of Mormon's legacy, its positive contributions, and its potential for harm.
Okay.
It's a text that has inspired millions to live lives of faith, service, and compassion. But it's also a text that has been entangled with colonialism, cultural erasure, and the justification of oppression.
It's a complex legacy that demands both appreciation and critical examination.
It does.
It reminds us that even sacred texts can be interpreted and used in ways that are both liberating and harmful.
Well said.
Yeah.
It speaks to the need for dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation.
Absolutely.
We need to engage in these difficult conversations with open hearts and minds, seeking to learn from the past and build a more just and equitable future.
It's a reminder that the journey of understanding doesn't end with a single deep dive.
That's right.
It's an ongoing process of exploration, reflection, and dialogue.
Exactly. As we conclude our deep dive,
Yes.
I want to leave our listener with a final thought. Could the Book of Mormon, with all its complexities and contradictions, serve as a catalyst for healing and reconciliation between Latter-day Saints and indigenous communities? Could it be a starting point for acknowledging past harms, reclaiming indigenous voices, and building bridges of understanding and respect?
That's a powerful and hopeful question. It underscores the transformative potential of engaging with difficult histories and grappling with the ethical implications of our beliefs. It's a journey worth taking both individually and collectively. Thank you for guiding us through this fascinating deep dive. I'm sure our listener will continue pondering these questions long after we sign off.
The pleasure was all mine. May our shared journey of learning and understanding continue.
If you find value in this exploration, please like, share, follow, and consider becoming a subscriber. Your contributions help keep these conversations going and allows us to maintain the highest quality production. You can find all the details at studyfaithwithai.com. Thank you for being part of this journey.